Our Region's Business is sponsored by PNC for the Achiever in You. Welcome to Our Region's Business with your host, Bill Flanagan.
Today on Our Region's Business, a silver anniversary for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Former Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburgh will reflect upon our region's role in making it happen and talk about what's left to do. But first, with more than a year under his belt, City of Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto has been attracting national attention for his efforts to bring city government into the 21st century and to create a more welcoming city at the same time. It all seems to be bearing fruit. Time magazine, the New York Times, and the Washington Post recently published glowing articles about Pittsburgh. Most recently, Metropolis magazine named Pittsburgh one of the 11 best and most livable cities in the world, thanks largely to a commitment to preservation. Well, Bill Peduto is back with us today. He's the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, and welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Bill.
Yeah, congratulations on all the buzz. This has been pretty crazy the last few weeks.
It has been, and I think that we're starting to see what's been a buildup of about 5 or 6 years worth of efforts, starting to get that publicity that now is soaking down to a lot of different people that hadn't heard it before.
Yeah, you talk about 5 or 6 years of efforts. It's really a couple of decades, and I know through your career on council as well as now in the mayor's office, you've been involved in a lot of it. But we'd be remiss to talk about the transformation of Pittsburgh without marking the passing of one of the most important civic leaders, Elsie Hillman, this past week.
Last month I had the great opportunity to sit in her living room with Mrs. Hillman and Mr. Hillman and my Chief of Staff Kevin Acklin, and since taking office back in 2002 I've had the opportunity to have somebody who I consider a friend and a mentor, somebody who sat and talked to David Lawrence, you know, somebody who has been there on every major initiative of this city and knows all of what happened. And she's going to be missed on a personal level, but on a greater level for this entire region. The one thing I'll say about Elsie, and when we spoke, she wouldn't let me call her Mrs. Hillman. She always said, call me Elsie. But when she signed the letter, it was always Mrs. Henry Hillman. I think that really describes her. She came from an economic stature, but she walked with the people. And she was somebody who got into issues that most people of her stature would never get involved. But if she saw an injustice, she wanted to see it right, and she knew that she had the ability in some cases to pull all the sides together. I've never met anyone who didn't like her.
No, that's true.
And it's because she did take that, she did push the issues, but she did it in a way with grace.
Well, it's interesting. You think about our region and Pittsburghers in particular, no matter which side of the political spectrum they're on, they all seem to come together for Pittsburgh, and I think that's what people really appreciated in Mrs. Hillman.
Somebody said to me she could call anyone and they'd pick up the phone, and I said there was a reason, because it was never for her.
No, really good point. Well, I want to talk about your first 18 months in office, but obviously it's the nature of these sorts of interviews that the news and events get in the way. And so a couple of issues I wanted to touch upon before we get to that. Number one, the action in council this past week around paid sick leave in the city of Pittsburgh. Yeah. You on board with this?
Oh, yeah. I'll be signing the document later this afternoon. The legislation. This is something that cities across the country have gotten on board with the White House. We had hoped to see something like this happen at the national level. We're the only westernized country in the world that doesn't offer paid sick leaves to its workers. It's a guaranteed right of every worker of every Western country, in some third world countries. States across the country have begun to adopt it, and now with Pittsburgh, the 20th city in the country. It helps us to be a part of a growing recognition of where workers should be treated and how they should be treated, and companies that recognize that look to it in a positive light. And that doesn't mean just the ones that are here. And realize that over the course of the past 2 months there have been dozens of amendments made by small businesses who had concerns, and they wanted it to look a little bit more like Philadelphia's, and council has amended it to do so. But it's other companies that we are meeting with and talking with from around the world. This past week I met with 31 companies that came in about clean technology. These types of issues are important to them. It's a different type of an economic development model, and those types of companies appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's an important issue, certainly for many workers as well as companies. The city, though, is one of 130 municipalities in Allegheny County, and about a third of the population. Does it concern you to be in the lead on an issue like that? that when the investment decision or the location decision can be fairly easily made here in our region?
Yeah, I understand that companies can then choose to move down the street and not to abide. But for so many of the companies that would be affected, it's because of the place of Pittsburgh that they choose to be here, whether it's a restaurant or the ability to have a direct population immediately around them. They choose to locate in the city because of the location.
Okay, moving on to another big issue that's been front and center, and you've been quoted recently, is the whole issue of municipal pension reform and the governor's veto of a Republican Senate, a Republican-sponsored bill in the Senate that would have really reformed the way municipal pensions are funded and operate in the state of Pennsylvania. Big deal for the city of Pittsburgh?
It's the most important issue that we have on our Harrisburg agenda, not only for the city of Pittsburgh, but for all the cities across Pennsylvania. Mayors, Democrat and Republican, have all gotten together and have said to the state legislature and to the governor, if you really want to help our cities, this is the most important thing that you can do. We cannot sustain our governments with the pension rules that you place upon us, and all we're asking for is a more fair way to be able to do it in the future. It doesn't affect anybody's pension today, but for every new employee, there's a way that we can actually pay it. We can't actually pay the pension plan that the state mandates upon us. So Democratic mayors across the state have supported the Republican legislation that's before the Senate and the House because it's the only plan being presented that really addresses the issue. And what we've also done is taken a position opposing the proposals that have come up, which are to borrow more money, to basically go and to take out bonds. If we want to look at an example of how that's failed, look at Pittsburgh. We borrowed $300 million to pay off pensions in the past. Now we have a broken pension program and $300 million in debt, a debt ratio higher than any other city in the country. And then the other thing is selling public assets. You can't sell the cow to save the farm. And the idea of selling something that provides revenue back is a short-term gain that will only cost us in the future, where we still have the problem and won't have the money. So you can't fix a structural problem with short-term revenue.
The state doesn't have a budget yet. Do you think this can be part of that conversation, or does the budget have to get done before municipal pensions gets addressed?
I think it should be a part of the same discussion that's going on with the state pensions. And I think the state and municipal pensions should be dealt with at the same time. It's already a difficult vote, and I understand that. And I've talked to Democratic leadership about this and realizing that it's a tough vote for them to take. But ripping the Band-Aid off twice, I don't think is a proper way to approach it. And if you start to look at all the different issues that the governor has right now with Republican leadership, the pension on the state and municipal leadership should be an issue that they're negotiating and working through this budget process, and not waiting till after it gets done and then trying to go through it a second time.
All right, very good. Well, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of your reflections on 18 months in office. More with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto right after this. Stay with us.